Hello everyone, I'm Kevin, otherwise known as FormBX257, here to bring you another 1980s and 90s G.I. Joe toy review. And today I'll be taking a look at the G.I. Joe's Intervention Specialist, the 1990 Bullhorn. Now, Bullhorn does not make any comic book appearances, at least not in the old movie comic run of G.I. Joe anyway. But he makes his first cartoon appearance in the Deke animated TV episode titled United We Stand. Intervention Specialist sounds a bit odd today. Sounds like something Dr. Phil would put on his resume, but I guess the modern equivalent would be a hostage negotiator or crisis specialist. Taking a look at his accessories, first we'll start with Bullhorn's, Bullhorn. It's a two-piece design where the cone can actually come off. And as you can see, we're left with a gun-like object, which I am guessing is the gas gun. We have a gas mask. Nice little option about the gas mask is that it's flexible enough that you can actually place it in a variety of ways on his head. Not only down and over his face, but you can have it leading up so that he's looking out through this thing. He has a primary weapon being a very large rifle. This is a very distinctive design. It's the Steyr AUG-A1. He also comes with a backpack. Very interesting little greebly design in there. I'm kind of wondering whether that's a keypad or something to lock this, because this is actually an opening item. It just has a latch there, and if you open it up, it opens up attaché style, where you can see the stored weapon on the inside, a takedown rifle. So he actually has a secondary weapon. I'm not sure if this rifle is based on any real-world military rifle, but it is fairly realistic looking. It's rather unfortunate that this doesn't have a proper kind of down angle on the stock end, because it's pretty much impossible for the figure to actually hold on to this in any meaningful way. As you can see, this is pretty much the best I can actually have him holding on to it. Kind of him shooting it from the hip, which kind of renders the scope kind of useless. Rather unfortunate, because the gimmick of hiding that secondary weapon in the backpack is actually quite clever. But of course the AUG has no problem sitting in this figure's hands, despite the fact that the bullpup design actually makes it kind of difficult to get the hand in there in the first place. But once it is in there, it actually lines up quite nicely. You'll notice that I didn't name any of the accessories after the contents list on the card. That's because out of all the card contents lists that I've seen, Bullhorn is the most confusing. I mean, just look at it. It mentions a helmet. Well, his gas mask is really not a helmet at all. Then there's the gas gun, and the Bullhorn is a separate item. Well, a Bullhorn is not just the cone, it's the cone attached to the gas gun, which is why I'm just putting gas gun in the sort of quotations here. And then there's a rifle with scope, and both of his rifles have scopes on them. So which rifle is the contents list even referring to? Bullhorn's design is not that of a classic soldier, even though he is clearly in the military, what with all the pouches and weapons sculpted onto him, of course the camo, and of course the overall color scheme being very earthy. But one thing that I actually find very fascinating about Bullhorn, especially, I mean, it seems like Bullhorn has a very heavy jacket on, as well as the gaiters, which suggests a rather cold environment. But because it's not an Arctic color scheme, it's, well, quite frankly, very dull, very almost muddy, because the camo is the brown camo, It really reminds me of sort of a Northern European theater of operations that he's actually geared up for, which is a very interesting thing in 1990. Of course, there are more interesting little details, like the fact that he seems to have a headband on his head. It's not like a bandana or anything, it's just a straight rope, which doesn't seem to be like tied up anywhere. It's just a straight band. I'm wondering whether that was specifically for the gas mask, or whether he's actually tying his hair back in some shape, way, or form. Very strange. Of course, another very interesting option here is having his gun on the top of his thigh. That's a very unusual choice, as you would normally have it on the side here, making me kind of wonder whether this figure might have been designed as a driver figure. This is a type of thing where you would either have it sitting in a driver's seat or in a cockpit, where you'd want things on the top of your thighs for access rather than on the side. One of the more interesting items on him is the sculpting on his collar. As you can see, he has these rectangular shapes on the tips of his collar, which really remind me of either a lieutenant or a captain's bars. To me, this actually makes a lot more sense, because as an intervention specialist, he would have command duties. I mean, surely he has to have the authority in order to accept a surrender from any type of major bad guy. And yet, the file card suggests that this guy is a sergeant? That's very strange. I wonder if they downgraded him in order to make him seem a bit more younger for the boys crowd that would be buying this figure. But to me, honestly, there were quite a few officers in the G.I. Joe ranks, and many of them were very beloved by the younger crowd, so I don't really understand why this might have been dropped. Or perhaps I'm just reading too much into what could just be plain old buttons on his collar. Bullhorn does not take over for any one G.I. Joe, but he has the characteristics of several rolled into one. As I mentioned before, he has to have the authority to accept the surrender of a major bad guy, and you have to be sort of tactical minded and at least part of the command structure in order to be able to do that. So I think one character he should be taking over from, or at least being equivalent to, is a guy like the 1987 Psych Out, who is part of the psychological operations. Psych Out was also an officer proper, a lieutenant, in fact. One thing I've noticed with the figure, however, is some of his accessories seem not really behind the field, but more like on the field itself, like the gas gun and the gas mask really do seem like something that you would be in the field encountering the bad guys face to face. And to me, that seems kind of like what a SWAT officer would do, going straight through the doorway of any hostage situation and right up to the bad guys themselves. So here I have a 1988 Shockwave, the sole SWAT member of the G.I. Joe team, and I think that they actually would make a fairly good pair. But you'll also notice that he also has that big rifle. The AUG is well known for being a sniper rifle as well as an infantry rifle on top of that. And he does have a background of being a sharpshooter. So a guy like the 1986 Lowlight, who, while he operates mostly at night, he has sharpshooting abilities. So this is one of the things that he ought to be able to do on top of all that. And just like the G.I. Joes, Bullhorn doesn't really have a single opposite number on the Cobra's side. However, he has several rolled up into one. As I already mentioned, he has the same intelligence capabilities. Of course, there were quite a few intelligence officers and high-ranking officers in the Cobra hierarchy. But for Cobra Command, especially for a main soldier, I think the Crimson Guard, or Crimson Guard Immortal, as I have here the 1991 version of the figure, is close enough to the year that they could be counterparts, really. And of course, when you're talking about kicking down doors and throwing gas grenades in people's faces, you can only think of an urban soldier like the 1989 Alley Viper. And on top of that, we also have at least someone to operate a large sniping rifle, and while we don't really have a Cobra sniper at all, we do have several characters who do handle sniping duties, and one of the main figures like that is a 1990 Rock Viper. What do you think? Am I overthinking it or way off base and missing a very obvious analog to Bullhorn here? As I mentioned previously, that one little detail, the sculpted on holster on the top of his thigh, kind of gives me the indication that he could be a vehicle-based figure. Perhaps not maybe a driver, but at least a passenger, often enough that he would have that arrangement of his holster. And I can't think of a better vehicle for him to be operating from than the 1990 Hammer. Obviously, issued in the same year that the figure came out. Are they meant for each other? I don't really know. But you'll notice that I took the machine gun, the proper machine gun, of the Hammer off of this thing. And one very interesting thing that I've discovered is it actually does kind of fit in there. It's obviously not supposed to, but it can. Well, I won't deny that there's an appeal to actually playing with this figure. I mean, you can imagine some kid just having him with the Bullhorn tossing insults at someone else who's playing with their Cobra figures. But I don't really see him as being a very good display figure with the Bullhorn. And in fact, that I really don't display him with the Bullhorn or even the gas mask on. His face sculpt is actually quite interesting. He looks a little bit on the sallow side, but his face is actually covered with camo, so it looks kind of cool, just open and exposed like that. Honestly, I really do have him displayed as a daytime sniper. Sometimes just with his attaché case open to reveal that he has even more options to shoot with. If you're looking for a Bullhorn figure on the aftermarket, he is actually a fairly common figure and fairly easy to find with all of his accessories, and for a reasonable price, although not really a cheap price, as he does come with a lot of small parts. He is a fairly sturdy figure. He's not one of those figures prone to thumb or crotch breakages, but one thing you do have to look out for, which is probably how he winds up being on the slightly premium side of the average common figure, is that sometimes one, two, or all three of the components for his takedown rifle are missing from his backpack. That's something that you do have to look out for and have to keep a keen eye on, because they are quite recessed when they're placed in the backpack. So if a seller is only showing you a photo of the backpack with the thing slightly open and nothing but shadow in there, it can be a little bit difficult to see whether you have all three of these components. But like I said, that's pretty much only for the die-hard collector who wants this thing absolutely complete, because like I said, he can't really hold that rifle in its complete form anyway. You really do have to have him holding either his quote-unquote gas gun or his regular gun here. In the UK and Europe, the second releases of many 1990 figures got spring-loaded upgrades. This was to keep up with the 1991 US and Canada releases that had gimmicks. Bullhorn was given the 1991 Snow Serpent 2 missile launcher and missile, done in a unique brown and green color scheme. I guess today we would call that a tip, which can be removed, or a hand-to-hand door-kicking. Well, that's all the time I have right now. Please check out my Facebook page for more information and behind-the-scenes photos for these reviews. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for next time to see another 1980s G.I. Joe toy review. See you then.